Hello, welcome to CubsPS Plus The Signs, a new podcast designed to be a short dive into interesting numbers, trends, or plays related to the Chicago Cubs. I'm your host, Mike Waller. I decided to take on this new project. I'm hoping to land in your feed 1 or 2 times a week to be really kind of the start of something. It'll be something that may eventually become part of a larger show, or maybe something I couldn't quite fit into one of my recent shows. And baseball plays always start with the signs. Pitcher and catcher have signs. Coaches and base runners and coaches and hitters have signs. Fielders have signs. It kind of gives people an idea of what to do depending on what happens next. And that's how I want this to follow. I sort of got the idea from NPR with their Planet Money series. They spun out of Planet Money a daily called The Indicator, where they dive into something very specific. It doesn't necessarily have a larger storyline behind it. They tend to be between 5 and 15 minutes, typically quick hit, get into something very specific and get out. And that's how I want this to be. I'm going to hit topics that either I don't feel like I touch well enough in my regular episodes, or something that maybe didn't fit in a regular episode. I sometimes find myself getting off into a tangent on the larger episode, which is fine. I mean, if you guys are listening to this, you've continued to listen, even though I do that. But this will hopefully make those episodes a little bit tighter, give me a different place to hit some of these things, and give you something that's a little bit more of an appetizer, or something that, is just quicker and doesn't take up quite as much time. And so for this first episode, I want to talk about blown saves. Blown saves are a pet peeve of mine, both in terms of baseball and in terms of kind of the statistical record keeping. I like statistics and numbers in baseball. I mean, in my intro of the main podcast, I'm a baseball stat nerd. And numbers can give a lot of meaning. They can sometimes be misleading. They can sometimes show you something that's not there. And sometimes that becomes something that, it's not there yet. Maybe some of the expected stats we've talked about, you're hitting the ball hard and you're maybe coming out of a slump, but not quite seeing the results yet. And eventually those balls start falling. I'm a big believer in things like that. When it comes to relief pitchers, the Cubs bullpen has been an obvious problem. I mean, looking at the numbers for the season, the Cubs have blown 23 leads. The Cubs are 14-20 in one-run games. And the Cubs have 18 blown saves, which is, among the worst in baseball. The White Sox and the Rockies are worse. I think there's another team tied with the Cubs at third worst at 18. And the White Sox are a historically awful team, so that doesn't surprise me. And the Rockies aren't very good either, so that's not great company to keep. So what does it mean, though? A lot of times you'll hear blown save. First thing you think of is a closer. So sometimes you come in the 8th with the bases juiced. With a 1-run lead, you got to get that one out and then get the next 3 in the 9th. Closers sometimes ask to get 4, 5, 6 outs. Sometimes you come in with a 3-run lead, come into a clean 9th, and you're facing the bottom of the order, and you could actually pitch fairly poorly and still get the save. So not all saves are equal to start with. And then you factor in when blown saves are unique. So a save situation means you come in to an opportunity where if you close out the game and don't give up the lead, you're going to get the save. Now, the way they keep these is only the last player keeping that lead can get a save. So it tends to be the closer, the guy who pitched last. Well, there's also a stat called holds. And if you get a hold, that means you came into what is scored as a save situation, but you're not the last pitcher to pitch. So you come into the 6th. You hold them scoreless. You maintain that lead. You get credit for a hold. In a sense, it's kind of the same as converting a save. It's clearly not converting a save. It is not a save. But it's the same category. So a blown save is kind of a misleading stat. It's a blown save situation, but you can get a blown save in the 5th or the 6th or the 7th or the 8th or the 9th. And when you dig into those, it kind of gives context on the bullpen. Now, I'm going to go into why I don't like this number. The reasons why I don't like this number don't change what I think about this Cubs bullpen. This Cubs bullpen struggles. This Cubs bullpen has had trouble both at the very end in the 9th inning, and they've also had troubles in the earlier innings. And that's a sign that at the trade deadline, the Cubs should be looking to add arms. Ideally, they'd add a couple. In an ideal case, they would add a solid closer and another leverage arm. I will also get into why maybe at least one is critical if they're not able to get two. But when you talk about holds, guys pile up holds for the Cubs this year. Mark Leiter Jr. leads them with 11 holds. Almonte has 6. Smiley has 3. Neris has 3. Miller has 3. The fact that we're this far into the season, the team has 40 holds, and only one guy who's currently healthy has more than 3 is kind of an indicator of this team. It's an indicator both of the bullpen because of the blown opportunities, and it's also an indictment of the offense. This team has not had enough leads late in games to hold, and that's been something we've seen repeatedly. But when you look at the actual save chances, last year, Adbert Alzolay was converted 22 of 26 saves. Pretty solid. Those aren't elite numbers. I mean, when you look at current leaders this year, we've got Ryan Helsley. He's converted 32 of 34 save chances. Emmanuel Clase for the Guardians has converted 29 of 32. Kenley Jansen for Boston has converted 19 out of 20. So, your top closers, your top reliable guys will go in there and convert the vast majority. But when you look at the Fangraphs numbers or Baseball Reference and look at the save percentage, it's a little misleading. So you'll look and see that the league average save percentage is 63%. I know when I tend to look at blown saves as a fan, the first thing I think of is the closer. But it's really that larger number in mind. It's really saves plus hold divided by, your total save opportunities. And so in those cases, Cubs rank out poorly both directions. They're 26th in save percentage and they're 27th in save plus hold percentage. So putting context on that number doesn't make the Cubs bullpen look any better. But I think it's an important way to look at it all the same. The Braves are a team that, as a staff, when you look at saves plus holds, they're top 5, top 6 in overall save plus hold percentage. They fall back much more to league average or a tick below if you look just at save percentage. They've had some trouble in the 9th inning. So there are times where you can contextualize and isolate, well, we have a pretty good bullpen, but we're really missing a closer, or, hey, our closer's nails, but we're not getting enough games to him. So there are ways to look at that. And reliever metrics are hard in general. I mean, a lot of people want to look at ERA, WHIP, the walks and hits per inning, K rates, walk rates, expected stats. Those are all good, and I like them in context. But the problem with a reliever is, especially things like ERA and WHIP. I mean, especially we're a little over halfway through the season. I mean, a reliever who's going to make 70 appearances, which is a ton, is maybe going to throw 65 to 80 innings, depending on whether they're a multi-inning guy or how often they go multi-innings, how often they come in to just get a couple outs and finish an inning. And, a starting pitcher, you can look at the ERA. That's eventually going to go 120, 150, 170. A couple guys every year will hit 200. They used to hit way more than that. If you're on pace to throw, say, 70 innings on the season, you're roughly at the halfway point. You're 30, 35 innings. If you've had 2 outings where you went out and gave up 3 runs without recording an out, I mean, that's going to bounce your ERA, and it's probably going to throw the ERA off the whole season. So that does not necessarily give a clear picture of how you've been pitching. Even walk rates and K rates. I mean, you can have a pitcher whose K rate is off the charts because nobody's really putting him in play, but the walk rate is up. So he's constantly putting guys on base, causing damage, and causing others to come in and give up those runs. And walk rate too. So a lot of these stats don't really give you, between the high sample sizes, high fluctuation from one outing to the next. I mean, every time these guys go out to pitch, they're pitching somewhere between a third of an inning and maybe 2 innings for the most part. A few longer guys throw more than that, but for the most part, it's 1 or 2 innings per. So if you give up a run and you pitch 2/3 of an inning, that's an ERA for that day that's like 10.5, I think. So that can be a misleading thing to look at. And now we look at blown saves. Let's look at blown saves specifically for an individual pitcher. So if you come in the 9th up 1, you give up that lead. Cool, you blew the save. Everybody knows that. If the Cubs have a good example, there was a game where after Hector Neris had lost his closer job for a brief period of time, The Cubs had gone with Colton Brewer, who successfully saved a game. A couple days later, Colton Brewer was put back in again to get another save and put some guys on base, and Drew Smyly came in. He was the one that actually gave up. He was pitching when the runs scored. The runs were assigned to Colton Brewer, but because Drew Smyly was pitching at the time, he gets assigned the blown save. So, again, that's a scenario where I could say Colton Brewer is the one that effectively blew the game. Drew Smyly was the one that was out there when the final nail was put in. But, it's just a challenge to look at that and have context. Now, again, the end result for the team is the same. The Cubs blew a save that day in the 9th inning and they lost the game. And you don't always lose the game too. So when you break this down, the Cubs have blown 7 9th inning leads, 6 8th inning leads, 2 7th inning leads, and 3 6th inning leads. Now that's all not the same. If you blow a lead in the 6th, you still have 3 more innings to potentially score. 7th inning, you have 2 more chances to come back and score and make that up. When you look at the record, the Cubs are 1-7 or 1-6 in the 7 9th inning blown saves. They're 2-4 in the 8th inning blown saves, 0-2 in the 7th, and 1-2 in the 6th. So in a few cases they've come back, but again, that points back to kind of that double blame on the offense as well as the bullpen. The Cubs are playing a lot of tight, low-scoring games where if the bullpen seems to give up any damage, it seems like the offense doesn't come back and make up for it. Now, there are some positive trends in that regard. So the Cubs, over the last 30 days, are actually middle of the pack on blown saves with 2. So they've only had 2. So they have 18 for the first 2.5 months, and they've only had 2 in the last month. So that's a sign of improvement. The bullpen has been stabilizing. And in that time, they've got 5 saves, 10 holds. So basically 15 of 17 save chances they've converted on, which is a far better percentage than what they've done to date for the season. And that could be a sign that the bullpen's improving. Hopefully we're going to get relief pitchers back. I'm hoping Julian Merriweather and Caleb Killian will be back soon. Hopefully the Cubs make a move. Now, one way to look at this is the Cubs have kind of split their damage in the 8th and the 9th. Now, in the 8th inning saves, there was one game where the Cubs ultimately blew an 8-0 lead to San Diego early in the season. Adbert Alzolay was brought in the 8th after Luke Little struggled and Amante came in and then Neris came in, and they got to Alzolay in the 8th, and they were hoping he could get, I think it was a 4-out save. It might have been 5. And he couldn't. He blew that save in the 8th. That's the one save in the 8th that I would attribute to, quote, the closer. That's the guy the Cubs wanted to shut the door. All the other saves in the 8th have been, Neris blew one before he was the actual closer. Drew Smyly's had some. Hodge has one. Like, guys blowing in the 6th, 7th, and for the most part in the 8th have not been the starter. It's been the setup guy or a setup guy that have blown those games. And so that's a sign that the Cubs need help in both aspects. Now, Hector Neris is 13 of 17 on saves since taking over as closer. That's better than what they had shown before. It's not great. Ideally, the Cubs would still get a closer, but especially at the trade deadline, closers are, number one, hard to come by. A lot of teams are looking for them. And because of both the supply and the demand, they become very expensive. And with the Cubs being 47-51 heading into the start of the second half today against Arizona, I don't know if the Cubs are going to be on the market to pay that premium closer price. Obviously, the Cubs did in 2016. They paid a very high prospect price with Gleyber Torres, but it was worth it. The Cubs got Aroldis Chapman, and I don't think there's any way they win the World Series without him that year. So that was a choice that was made. This year, I don't see them making the same choice. But if the Cubs can shore up 6th, 7th, 8th, get some more help. Maybe Merriweather comes back healthy. He's able to take over the 9th, slot Neris back, or just add to the 7th, 8th situation, shore up more of those games. The Cubs are in a position where they're 3.5 games out of the wild card, 4 games behind St. Louis for both second place in the division and the number 2 wild card. They're 8 games out of first. The league average save rate, so going back to just that save rate, is 63%. The Cubs are at 55%. If the Cubs had the same number of save chances but converted at 63% rate, they would have 3 more wins. So they, would be right there for the wild card. They'd be in a much better position for the division. And it doesn't take a lot to make those changes. A couple games here and there will turn the difference. So with that, I'll conclude this episode. I'm not a big fan of the blown save stat. It gets used a lot, but make sure when you're listening to it that you're taking it in proper context. It doesn't always mean the ninth. It doesn't always mean the closer. It is a sign when you look at a team-wide level of kind of how that team is doing, but it doesn't even necessarily define the overall record. As noted, the Cubs have won 4 games where they've blown a save. Heck, they had 1 game where they blew 2. On opening day against Texas, they blew the save in the 6th. That was, I believe, Mark Leiter Jr. No, that was Yency Almonte gave up a tying home run in the 6th. And then the Cubs got the lead back, and then Edward Alzolay gave it up in the 9th, famously, for that 4-3 loss on opening day. So you can have more than one in a game. That's how baseball goes. So hopefully the Cubs can continue showing an improved bullpen and take that blown save stat in proper context. CubsPS Plus, The Signs, is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, joining great shows like The Sun Ranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, and Baseball Rabbit Hole. The Bleacher Bunch feed is available wherever it is you get your podcasts, and CubsPS Plus is always available ad-free for both the regular and The Signs to Patreon supporters at patreon.com/CubsPS Plus, where you can support the show for as little as $1 a month. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can always find me on Twitter, X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus, a spin on the baseball metric OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it? Please drop a review wherever it is you find your podcasts. If you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you can share an episode with a friend. Go Cubs!